Well, I think we've got all the members of our waterfront committee. I don't see Pete Slavinsky though.
Were we expecting him? Or did we know?
I don't see Barnaby.
And
No,
Barnaby, I know Barnaby's going to be there.
Yeah, I know he is.
Barnaby will be here. Let's see if anybody's sending me messages.
No. Names on bottom.
It looks like him. That's good.
Mud's good.
Oh, no. He's not part of this.
Oh, now.
You're up there.
You're right. How come we don't see it?
I don't know.
It says mute.
Oh, there's Barnaby.
There's Barnaby. Good.
I don't know. Right? You don't see
Nobody declined the meeting.
What do I do?
Click on it. I don't know.
I understand there's a difference between declining the meeting and the members of the committee being in decline. Thank you. At least somebody laughed.
Get off of mute.
We're all older than 40, so we're all on the decline.
Click it off?
Yeah.
Hey, Barnaby.
No.
Hi, Barnaby.
Hello.
Well, this was a good meeting. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Well, let's get started then. Thank you all for joining us today. And today we're going to hear from Malone and McBroom, and you all received the report that they finished up, the memo they finished up. You received that today. Jan, did you want to start out with an introduction or?
Sure. Yeah, what we I want to thank the committee for hearing this particular presentation that we've done. We have today from our team, we have David Murphy from Malone and McBroom and Noah Slovin from Malone and McBroom. I'm not sure. Not sure if Mike Zarba made it on or not. He did. Okay.
Yeah.
I am on, yeah.
And Mike is on as well. And then we also have Ryan Wingard from Wright Pierce. The purpose of today's call or of our presentation today is we had started out our first step in this whole process was going to be kind of review where we're at, come up with some recommendations as to what direction to pursue with our further in-depth studies. So we had some direction for those particular studies. And that's kind of what we're looking to present today. We had prepared, we have got a memo prepared. We're open to some suggestions from your end as to if there's any changes that need to be made or if we need to address something differently. We're open to those suggestions and welcome that input before we finalize that and set the direction for the rest of it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David and Noah to run through our presentation with a slideshow. Now, I don't know, they may have to get permission for to take over that or be able to share their screens.
I'd also suggest, Jan, just as a point of order, that if you're not speaking, since we do have so many people on the call, that if you're not speaking, if you could just please mute yourself so everyone can be heard. So I appreciate that.
Good point, Ryan. Thank you.
Noah, do you want to share or do you want me to share a screen?
I'm happy to share a screen, but I do not have permission to share a screen right now.
Why don't you give it another try there? I think you should have it.
Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. You're right. I do. Okay. So let's get this up. Are people able to see my
Oh, yeah.
presentation here?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, hi everybody. My name is Noah Slovin. As I was introduced, working with Malone and McBroom. So I'll start running through a little presentation here that basically we are pulling out the key points from the memo that we prepared and just running through those one by one in this presentation. So the structure here is, first we'll kind of review the goals of this design, the kind of framework that we're working in here, talk a bit about what the design flood elevation might be based on what information that we've been collecting and looking at so far. The primary flood protection system options that we looked at, and then some kind of other features such as openings within that flood protection system, some other features, and then we have a little bit about the certification requirements that FEMA has for FEMA certified flood protection systems that take an area or that come with a FEMA map change. And then we can talk about next steps after that. So the design goals that we understand, as we understand them to be, we want protection from flooding in downtown Damariscotta. But in addition to flood protection, we actually want FEMA certification of that flood protection system and a map change. We would also like there to be future adaptability given sea level rise and the ability to increase the elevation of the crest of the flood protection system over time and make other changes. And then other features that are desired, a pedestrian path, having it have some aesthetic value, not be an eyesore, and then incorporating living shoreline features into it as possible, and then maintaining the parking area. So that's the framework as we understand it that we're working within. So I'll touch briefly on the climate change question, and this goes towards that adaptability question and what are we looking for the future. So the Maine Climate Council has come up with two basic categories of scenarios that they encourage coastal communities to plan for in the coming years. One of those scenarios they call committing to manage, and one they call preparing to manage. Those are the formal titles they've given those different scenarios. The committing to manage is what they're classifying as this very likely range of sea level rise. In this graph at the bottom, that's represented by those green lines. That's what those are called, lines. Those green lines in the chart there. So by 2050, that they're putting that at roughly 1.5 feet of sea level rise along the coast, and about 4 feet by 2100. The preparing to manage, this is, given the uncertainties that still exist around the science and possible future changes in scenarios that may result in even higher sea level rise, they're encouraging this kind of prepare to manage. So like be ready in the future to kind of rethink your designs and your planning to account for 3 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and 8.8 feet of sea level rise by 2100. So these are the scenarios that the Maine Climate Council is putting forth. So we want to just make sure that we are considering those and thinking about those in our planning. So we put together a schematic here of what the different flood scenarios might look like. So here we have the Damariscotta parking area to the left with a car parked and a couple of people hanging out by the car, and the water is to the right. Right now, we're looking at a mean higher high water, so that's the daily higher high tide on a daily basis on average of 4.7 feet, and this is according to or relative to NAVD 88. Sorry, this is blocking my screen, so I can't actually see what I'm saying. Okay, the highest astronomical tide is 6.7 feet, so that's the less common very high tides that we're looking at. The top of bank around 8 feet, NAVD 88, it varies. It's not a flat bank, but that's kind of the general area that we're looking at. The highest observed tide is 8.9 feet. I did look this up. This is the 1978 blizzard is when that highest observed tide was reached. And some of the recent events like 2018 were about that same elevation of flooding in areas. So then these are the kind of the observed historical tides that we've seen. Some of the more modeled tides, 9.2 is the still water 1% annual chance still water elevation, or the 100-year still water flood elevation, according to both the NACCS data set and FEMA. FEMA puts the base flood elevation, which also accounts for wave action and wave run-up, at 10 feet NAVD 88 in this area. And then we have a couple other numbers here. So the 11 feet NAVD 88, that's the base flood elevation for the nearest coastal transect that FEMA has, which has a little bit, has a site-specific modeled run-up. And we just thought that might be a useful thing to look at nearby. That's also, if we look at the base flood elevation and then add 1 foot of freeboard, which is what a flood protection system would have to protect against, that's the 11-foot elevation. And then on top of that, if we add that committing to manage sea level rise of 1.5 feet by 2050, we get 12.5 feet BFE. And if we look at the planning to manage by 2050 of 3-foot sea level rise, that's up to 14 feet with the base flood elevation. So this is just kind of a range just to kind of get us settled in terms of what things are looking like. I would say, based on what we put together in the memo, our recommendation for the minimum potential design height would be 12 feet in order to be able to account for the in order to create a flood protection system that can be certified by FEMA, so that it's able to be to deal with the base flood elevation plus the 1 foot of I'm blanking on the word right now, of freeboard, and then having another foot of kind of a safety factor there, and that can also address some sea level rise. And then in terms of future adaptability of a structure to account for those sea level rise scenarios, we might go up to 13 feet for sea level rise extension, which is my understanding of kind of what our cap is in terms of the height of the structure. And we might consider having it be able to have some kind of longer term extension, looking way out to some of those more significant sea level rise scenarios. So this is kind of what some of that would look like. In terms of the actual approach to building a flood protection system, there are kind of two general approaches. This one on the left, elevating and filling, that would be filling the entire parking lot and elevating it to above the flood elevation so that it's taken out of the FEMA flood zone. For a variety of reasons, this has been determined to not be feasible or preferable in the community. So we're looking at building a flood protection system around the parking lot. There are essentially two ways to do this that can comply with FEMA, either building an earthen levee or building a pile supported wall. It would have to protect to a base flood elevation plus 1 foot. There's a star next to that because it depends a little bit on the specifics of an area, and there are some exceptions in both directions. But additionally, that protecting the base flood elevation plus 1 foot would mean having extra elevation above that base flood elevation plus 1 foot to protect against run up and wave overtopping and things like that. So I think I'll pass it off to Dave to talk through those two different options for flood protection systems.
Okay, thanks, Noah. And since you're controlling the slides, I guess you will control the animation. So thank you for doing that. So for the earthen levee option, which is one of the two primary means of developing a flood protection system, it is what it sounds like. It's a mound or a berm of earthen materials, sometimes with some sort of core, like a clay or a concrete core, but not in this image on the right-hand side. There are benefits to using this approach. You can incorporate vegetation, you can plant it in kind of a couple different ways. You cannot usually have large trees on it, but you can have different kinds of grasses and decoratives perhaps. You can support pedestrian pathway on, over it, next to it, winding over and across it, etc. It can be relatively inexpensive because of materials that you need to use and the lack of anchoring that's needed compared to a wall, which is on the next slide. You can add sandbags, which you often will see if you see pictures from the Midwest when flooding of the Mississippi River is going on. There's oftentimes people running out, putting sandbags on top of the levee. And then there's some moderate adaptive capacity. So those are all the benefits, but there are some very large challenges. The large footprint is really the biggest one. In areas where we have looked at berms or levees, the side slopes are such that the width is so much greater than the height. So even though the height here would only be 5 or 6 feet from current grade, the width would be several times that. So you start to really cut into the area that you're using for parking and for recreation. And then there's construction disruptions. Compaction can be a big issue. There's a lot of weight that's going to go on the ground surface to build a levee. And the subsurface materials may have trouble supporting that. And then, of course, if the subsurface materials can't support the weight, there's flexing or strain on underground utilities underneath and even nearby. So some challenges that would occur. Next slide, Noah. So moving on to the wall, there are some benefits, there's some challenges, but maybe fewer of each. And I'll run through that and hopefully it'll make sense. So the benefit is less of a construction impact in terms of area and logistics. Minimizes the impact on parking, utilities. If you have utilities underground that are nearby, this can kind of coexist with them without a lot of weight right on top of them. You can design a wall to minimize weight of run up and overtopping. Those are some design details that would come into it. There are opportunities for murals, essentially, interpretive and decorative art. And we'll look at some examples in about 2 minutes. There is space generally available for pathway in front of it, behind it, on maybe perhaps on both sides of it. And it does also leave room for a living shoreline in front of it at the water side. So the challenges are the cost typically. Sometimes the design can be tricky because you have to make sure that anchoring is sufficient. There can be sometimes lower adaptive capacity. You can't just balance sandbags on top of a wall. They would fall off, of course, so you're looking at other things. Instead, panels that can be added, slid onto rails, for example. And sometimes hard structures just don't look good. It impacts our views in a different way than a levee would. Next slide. Openings are a big issue, whether you're using a wall or a levee. So either one of the flood protection systems would have an opening, for example, at a boat ramp. I think one of the strengths here is that we're not looking at a lot of openings along the road. So, for example, an opening along a boat ramp is something that could be kind of kept closed more often than one along the road. But in general, some of the things that you would need to commit to, a flood warning system, which it doesn't mean a siren on top of a roof. It means a written protocol in place to distribute messages and make sure that someone can always be reached, perhaps someone from Public Works, and it would be their job to go out there. That person would essentially never be on vacation. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get what I mean. The warning system would be very comprehensive. Assignment of responsibilities, which I've already implied, an operations plan, which would enumerate all these points. There would need to be periodic closures, testing and training. So what does that mean? You don't sit around a table talking about what you would do. It means you go out there, you drag the closure structure out from wherever you've hidden it and make sure you can get it out. There's not new weeds in front of it or a padlock that somebody forgot about and now we don't know where the key is. So the testing and training would kind of take care of that. There'd be inspection and maintenance. We're involved with one right now, a closure structure in Connecticut where we're going to help them design some repairs because there's been some rusting of the joints. And then there's always liability concerns. Is all this going to happen? And if not, whose problem is that? So continuing on, these are some pictures that Noah found. He's brilliant at finding pictures. This is you'll see in the next slide, it looks more like a closure system in Washington, D.C. along the Potomac River. Really clear, want to be clear, this is not for a map change. This is a closure system that was put in place just for some risk reduction. But you can see with the picture on the right-hand side, which is about to appear, that if you forget to close the closure structure, or if you run out of time and get only part of it closed, that residual risk becomes suddenly your primary risk. So flooding can occur. So really important to really demonstrate to FEMA that you will close the structures. These are just some pictures of how one could possibly potentially decorate a flood protection system. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So we won't all on the phone call like all of these examples, but you may be able to imagine that there are other possibilities that can be used if you have a wall instead of a levee as your flood protection system. The one on the lower left, I would not say that's a living shoreline in front of the wall, but it could kind of give you an idea of what it would like to have something partially planted in front of the wall. And if we made that greener with less rock, we might be able to call it a living shoreline. And, this is an example of a walkway, a pretty boring walkway in front of a wall, but I think what's really important is that the views from this walkway are spectacular. They're not impeded by the wall because the walkway is in front of the wall. And so even though one of us might not design something to look like this, you can see the benefits of having the access in front of the wall. And these are just kind of some of the certification requirements right out of the Code of Federal Regulations. So some of the things that we've already talked about, design criteria, making sure there's freeboard, so go a little bit higher than the design flood elevation. And then Noah, you went to the next one pretty quickly, but I think that's all right. Okay, freeboard closures, protection, settlement analysis, drainage. That's the big thing that Wright Pierce will be looking at as part of this project, making sure there's drainage on the land side of the wall. A maintenance plan, which we've talked about. Next slide. The operations plan, making sure the warning system is comprehensive and written down, things are tested, inspected, and that the drainage system is operational, and there's a written protocol for that maintenance as well. That may be it. Yep. Okay. So taking about 20 minutes for the presentation, we kind of went through it quickly, but we wanted to leave enough time for open discussion. And I think having gone through the slides, we don't need to go through the memo point by point, but we also can do that if folks want to look at it.
One of the things that that struck me, and if you could put the slideshow back up and get to it might have been the second slide where you showed the wall with the people standing next to it. And it had all your elevations for the base flood elevation, the design elevation. I think it's very important in this group to kind of understand the meaning of the elevations that we're talking about here. So yes, this slide here. So I think the design elevation was going to be about 12 feet. That's what we've recommended, or MMI has recommended. So I think it's important to compare that to the existing grade out there, which is about 9 feet. So you're talking about a 4-foot structure. If those folks were standing there with a wall, you'd still, depending on how tall you were, be able to see over it. So I think that's important to understand and to kind of visualize as we're talking about that 12-foot number. Jan, I don't know if we've settled on that 12-foot number, if that's up for discussion, if we want to talk about different elevations. I think that's probably the basis.
There's some discussion that's going to happen, or some further investigation too, that's going to happen in the next phases. But this here is just to kind of set the kind of direction that we're looking at. We also are interested in getting feedback from the community and the committee on what their thoughts are on these different heights as well.
Okay, in the silence, I'll reach out there and say something. From my point of view, we have another height. And it was, well, historically it's been spoken of. We call it the flea height. The height at which downtown Damariscotta no longer becomes viable. And you're very close to the flea height. If you look at the Malone and McBroom study from 2015, you look at the design elevation considerations, storefront, ground, and door elevations. And you'll see that by looking at that, if we get to 15 feet or if we get to 14 feet, that's about as high as we can go before our downtown is toast. So if we're that close, the question would be, if we're that close to flea height, we should at least keep that in mind as we look at what height we're aiming for. Does that make sense? I mean, that's coming down from above rather than coming up from below. What you presented so far is coming up from below. All I'm suggesting is we're awfully close to the maximum we can ever have, as shown by Malone and McBroom's earlier study. So I just want to put that out there, that you're at 12.5 feet. You're only a foot to a foot and a half away. So we should look at that. We should keep that in mind as we can consider things going forwards, I think.
Can I raise the more current issue? Jan, I think it was you that did the videos of it, and that's what we're finding out about how our parking lot is actually made up, and the soup that is at best 3.5 feet down. I'm more concerned about that than I used to be. And I guess I don't know if any of you are hydrologists, but one of the questions I have is, do we suspect whether that water is simply whether it has come in from the ocean around us, or whether we're getting liquefaction happening, that's clay? What do we know about that, and what does that speak to our future in that parking lot?
Well, we are, as part of the study, we are doing additional geotechnical work. So there's going to be some additional borings that'll be happening later or this week potentially, and that will further inform, what kind of solution we do. Whether that water is coming in with the tide and going out with the tide, there may be some, but where we were digging and finding that water for the sewer trench, I assume that's what you're talking about, Richard. But that was quite a distance from any from the shoreline itself. So I have a hard time believing that there's that much water traveling that far that quickly in those clays that we are in. I think it's more speaks to the type of clays that we have down there. And there may be water traveling above those clays, but when we excavated, we broke through and into the clays. And once the water came off that interface between the gravel above and the clays below, mixed with the clays, it really it turned to a soup is really what it was.
In terms of its being as far back as you found it, from what you look at the water's edge, keep in mind that was the water's edge.
Right.
That was filled back in some instances, almost to the buildings, and in every instance, not that far from the building. So that was where you're finding that now was harbor.
Right. And I think that's one of the considerations ultimately in how to support any kind of wall or raise an elevation or anything that we do out there. We have to keep that in mind.
Right. I looking at, running a sheet down or pilings or whatever, get into what? It's not into granite, obviously. And it's just that the concern here, and I hate to be the dark person in this, is we need to pay attention. Are we trying to save a parking lot that isn't worth saving?
Well, I think the idea here is not necessarily the parking lot, but the buildings.
Understood that, but a lot of the decisions, a lot of the pros and cons about the kinds of water protection we put up continue to, and I've always been one of them, talk about the parking lot, about visibility, of not losing parking spaces and so on. And I'd like to be more comfortable that that's not an invaluable consideration to do all of that to save parking lots when that parking lot may not in the long run be
Viable.
all that viable.
Can I add a thought in, my experience in talking to Justin of the contractor that's doing the sewer work. The bad stuff that they ran into over in the West End, he said as soon as they got not too far away from that condition didn't exist anymore. And the pilings that would be driven down for this, with the restroom pilings were, they reached bedrock at about, it varied, but 17, 18 feet down. And I'm assuming any pilings you did for this wall will be down to refusal there too. So I don't think there's any particular problem with building the seawall, having it sturdy. There are some issues in terms of how high this could be to make it even viable, or what are we doing? How far do we go? Those are very valid questions.
I have a question. Dave, in your experience with FEMA, if we have a solid operations and maintenance plan, do you think that they would accept some type of passive or mechanical control at the boat launch, such as horizontal planking, something that the Public Works Department would install, on an as-needed basis?
So when you say passive, you mean ready to be mobilized at any time by anybody, or something that can be mobilized without human intervention at all? So operating.
No, with one that requires human intervention.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's what they would expect to see.
I just want to understand this now. So you're saying that, say we have a flood wall, except for a solid flood wall, except for where the boat launch is. And there, you've designed it so you have removable posts that are designed to accept horizontal boards that would be installed by Public Works, for example. They would accept something like that?
They would. As an example, this is a good example. I'm not sure that, when you say boards, what you're thinking and what I'm thinking and what anybody else in the call might be thinking might be different. So my answer is yes, they would find it acceptable, but then the details would need to be worked out, what they accept as the materials and how it moves, where it's stored. Is it something that comes up laterally or swings, or that would need to be worked out. But I think your example is a good one of something that would not acceptable.
That would not preclude us from being able to remove the downtown from the flood zone?
That's correct. I mean, there are levee systems that have roads through them. I'm trying to think of one that I see all the time. If you ever drive into Northampton, Mass, you drive right through one. It's accredited. Downtown is not in the flood zone, and someone has to deploy that closure structure. So that does not prevent the downtown from being out of the flood zone.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you.
I ask a question about the boat ramp. There was some talk early on about something called a reverse boat ramp. And obviously at these heights, that would be impractical or impossible. But would it still make some sense to put in a lift of some level, a foot and a half, just to deter things for a while and prevent having to put barriers in place for minor flooding over the next 15 years? One of the concerns was, as soon as you get into an area where you have to physically put a barrier in, now you've lost access to anybody who needs to get in and out of that water, whether it be safety or just somebody that was too slow to get his boat out.
Emergency access, yep.
Yeah, I mean, sure, it could be essentially left open, but if you're talking about something in the short term that provides some flood protection without a map change, that can be designed, that can be built. Like a little bump in the road kind of thing, if you're talking about that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, but it's more than a bump in the road. It would be an extended distance of some additional height so that people with boats and trailers can get in and out without grounding their car or truck or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The,
So the follow up on that question, is the reverse ramp totally impractical, something that can't be done, and we totally rule it out because the distances are not sufficient?
You know, I'm embarrassed to say I don't know enough about this idea. I think maybe in the time between our initial study and now, I haven't heard the reverse boat ramp discussion. I'm picturing it in my head. I can't say for sure whether the distances are enough to get up and over. I'd have to look at it further. Jan, are you familiar with this discussion?
I think what they're saying is if we built the boat ramp or had a boat ramp up here that had a height of whatever the flood elevation is, 12 or whatever it might be.
Right. Could we get up and over it?
Could we get up and over it? To me, I mean, off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I think we'd have to look at it, and it would likely impact some parking on the site because we'd have to be able to ramp up to it and then over it. So to me, it would have some impacts to the parking lot itself.
It strikes me also that we are talking about the west end of the parking lot, which is the very place where we've got the question about how much weight we can put on top of that. So
I agree.
And again, what I'm suggesting is that we don't have to do the whole 12 feet. Even 1 foot would give us more accessibility for the near future, and who knows how long that would be, 5 years, 10 years, rather than forcing ourselves to get into something that we're going to have to use barriers within a few years.
I don't know if there's any other boat ramp options on the river or in the vicinity, but I mean that's the other alternative would be to enhance another boat ramp so that you don't have this situation.
Aren't there several on the Newcastle side?
No, I don't believe so. There's one other one down at Hunter's Landing, and then you get one in South Bristol.
Right.
I don't think you have anything in Newcastle and
Nothing in Edgewater. I'm sorry, Edgecombe.
Edgecombe.
Nothing.
Maybe. I don't think there is even there. No.
There's no public ramp there.
The Hunter's Landing ramp is really partially wooden. It's not as utilitarian as what we have in town. The Darling Center's got a pretty handsome ramp, but they don't let the public use it. Then they've got a brand new one down in the gut in South Bristol. And East Boothbay must have a ramp. I don't know just where it would be. So there really aren't very many ramps. There's a real beauty down there in the gut.
That's something I hadn't heard anyone consider. In fact, I never even thought about it. Is there any potential area where you could put in another boat ramp? And that would alleviate all kinds of problems in the downtown area and increase parking and everything else to go with it.
When I was on the harbor committee, we looked into that and found nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
It's been looked at by many people over years, and the biggest problem is nobody wants to be next to a boat ramp. Period.
So, but it sounds like to me like we're saying we need something in an emergency. We don't need it permanently. We need an alternative for emergency use. That could be arranged differently in a different way, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. But I
Need for another ramp anyway.
Oh, you should. Yes, I agree.
Thing is, it takes quite a lot of doing to get boats in and out in an emergency situation. I mean, if you had 10 or 20 boats, they might not get out of the way in time. I mean, it's not so simple. It's not like a toll booth on a highway and one by one they come up and disappear. I mean, it takes a while, especially if they're sailboats.
Well, I guess it goes back to Barnaby. the issue of you're gonna know this storm is coming. It's not gonna come, overnight. It's gonna be a few days. And if somebody is stupid enough not to have taken their boat out ahead of time,
Always happens.
that's too bad as far as I'm concerned.
So when you were talking about this, I misunderstood. I was thinking we need emergency access for emergency responders. That's what I was thinking of. Only that use is an emergency ramp, not for everyone in their boat. So and that's the way I understood the conversation when we had it months ago about emergency access. What do we have for the emergency responders? Do the firefighters have to get in with their boats or whatever? That's what I was thinking about.
Well, keep in mind, this event is only probably a 6-hour event until the tide gets down, so it's not as if it's going to be days, that you're going to have to keep this barrier up.
And this might need to be written into the plan that, we've been talking about. If there's an operations plan, this would just become a part of it. So somebody's job would be to watch weather watches and warnings, and then think about, and you guys already do this, warning boaters to get out of the water ahead of time. You have this many hours until we need to close the structure, etc. That could be all written out.
If we're in a situation where we're putting public works on notice, we can be putting everybody on notice. And if you need to get your boat out, I'm not a boater to that extent, but it strikes me that boats float, and why are we pulling them out?
Yeah, they sink too, Dick. Because just this last event that we had, the summertime, that Barnaby's Road got completely washed out. Scott Folsom, who owns Schooner Landing, calling all the boat owners because some of them were sinking because that rain was coming down so hard, their internal pumps couldn't keep up with it. So that's probably a more often occasion.
I'm wondering about the wall at the west end of the parking lot. We own the big red barn type building with the sandwich shop and the fish market and the butcher shop. And if the wall extends behind us or up alongside us, are we going to need an opening?
That's a good question.
Yeah, and I think that is a very good question. At this point, it appears that based on what the town has control over for land, it looks like the wall potentially would run up alongside of you. And where your finished floor, I think your finished floor is around 11. So there may, and you come out and you have landings and so forth. So you may need to then climb or we could have a potential opening there to 11 feet or something. And so you would then have a stair on the inside of the wall, if you will, to get down over the wall. That's a possibility. So that would be where it says Riverside Butcher Company, that building there.
That building, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in the same light as the boat ramp, why couldn't that also just have a permanent opening that could be boarded up, if for the lack of a better term, as required, rather than having a permanent thing you have to climb up and over?
That would be better.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I mean, the existing buildings here, the plan that Malone and McBroom was intending was, as measures for each building owner, you would put in these flood, at each door, you'd have a little track and you'd put in these little barriers that come down when they needed it. And those are fairly common. The only problem with those is that each individual building owner has got to remember to do it. So.
Now, does that affect the floodplain qualification?
Well, it has to be considered as a system. So, I mean, you can't have breaches in here that some private owner, I think there has to be one entity that would cover, that would ensure the integrity of that wall system. So
the town, yeah.
And that being said, there was a fair amount of discussion a while back about passive barriers that would be just self-implementing. Has that discussion gone away?
I don't think it's been finalized yet on what type of system we could use there. Passive barriers are certainly an option. I think that with the, with the freezing and other actions that we have here in the Northeast, it may be a little bit more, we have to be a little bit more careful that we how we use those. In that boat ramp, there'll be a lot of traffic over it. There could be a lot of dirt that gets in there that could interfere with it, and maybe a higher maintenance type item. But it's certainly a possibility. It certainly is something that worth considering.
And on another tune, I think you had a price tag of 250,000 or so for a
Right.
device like that. So
Yeah,
I mean,
and
maybe it isn't practically worth considering if the price and maintenance outweighs any other options. I just wanted to know if we can put that one to bed or whether it's still hanging out there.
I just assume we not yet take it off the table.
it is good to hear that, FEMA would accept a well-managed, active participating system.
Yep.
In lieu of that, because I think we had assumed that that was the only way we're going to get it. But I agree with you, Dick, or whoever made the suggestion. Take it off the table.
I haven't heard much discussion about wall versus levee. I think the silence on that just means that the wall is the way to go. Is that what I'm hearing?
I vote for a wall.
I concur with the wall versus the levee.
Yeah,
Whatever it is, if it extends up the alley alongside our building, it's going to limit access to the parking lot.
And it does something that none of the waterfront committee members wanted to do right from the start, and that is take away parking spaces. It would take 1 or 2 rows of parking to install the levee. So I would say the levee is off the table.
I would agree. I would agree with that. Every time one of these big projects comes along, people kind of forget about how critical these parking spots are, and we lose them by the half dozens and dozens. When we redid the sidewalks on Main Street, I think we lost 10 parking spaces on Main Street, maybe more. And, it just keeps happening, and we just can't afford to give them up.
I am the one who tried to eliminate one parking space on Main Street, and found myself the subject of a political cartoon in the paper. I'm not
Was
doing
that a
that.
Glenn Chadbourne?
Yeah, exactly.
Photo ever taken.
Then I guess I should also like to bring up the fact that if sounds like we've all pretty much committed that the best thing is a wall, there was discussion about whether it be a transparent wall or not. And personally, I don't think that's all that wise a decision, but I'd like to hear everybody else's view.
I see people shaking their head no with you, Doug.
I think the transparent wall might be more expensive, but it would certainly be a maintenance nightmare in terms of keeping it clean.
Yeah, I like the idea, but you're just going to get salt residue and so on.
Good.
My one observation, because you're talking about possibly a 4-foot high wall if it's going to elevation 12. I had been, assuming that an elevation 11 would meet FEMA's requirement, forgetting about, storm wave action over the wall. A 3-foot wall, which would be up to elevation 11, would be not bad at all. Even sitting down at the park, you could look over it, it wouldn't be bad. 4-foot wall, that's something else to think about. it's an issue.
If we go back to the earlier PowerPoint, and I don't mean literally, but that very same drawing with the automobile sketched in, the 3-foot wall, I looked at that, it comes almost to the top of the tire of that make-believe car, and the 4-foot wall comes most of the way to the top of the hood.
Yeah.
Noah, this is when you say that drawing wasn't to scale, right?
Yeah, I should say, the drawing was a rough sketch in terms of scale, but not
Okay.
technically to scale. I tried to get
the
the car to be approximately 5 feet tall, which is standard, and the people were approximately 6 feet tall. So it should still give a sense in terms.
I think the best thing we ought to do is to go down in the parking lot and take something that's 3 foot or 4 foot high, place it down there, and everybody could get a good picture of what it was going to be like.
I want to
Great
pick up on
idea.
one of your points, George. You had said earlier that your vision would be that the park would be adjacent to the parking lot.
Oh,
and
right,
the wall would
yes.
be outboard of that.
Yeah.
In my mind, I've always had it'd be the parking lot, the wall, and then the park on the water side of the wall. I don't know. I'd like to gauge the committee in terms of that particular relationship and what people think where that wall should be placed.
Well, I'm with what you just said, John. Let the park be on the outside of the wall. The people can walk there and sit there and smoke, and well, they're not supposed to, but we do have a receptacle for cigarettes out there that gets used. What about the following? Can you design a wall? Can you design a wall that is 11.5 or 12 feet high, but can very easily and relatively inexpensively in 20 years be extended to 2 feet? In other words, since we've got working down from the flea height and working up from where we are, can we design and do what we do underground? Do we save money? Can we plan ahead in that way? Is there any advantage to planning ahead in that way? That's the kind of question I would want to ask.
That's the goal. Yep, that's what we want to do in our design.
I think there's some good sketches in that memorandum that show the initial wall height and then show 1 or 2 foot incremental increases as the need arises from sea level rise.
And I think that kind of takes care of the issue of whether it be a transparent wall or aesthetically pleasing wall. You leave it as low as necessary, as long as you can, and then just add to it 6 inches or a foot at a time, assuming it's a Lego kind of wall that just allows for that to happen easily.
What would be the access to this park on the outside of the wall? A style? I mean, how do people get to it?
I think there'd be two. Well, one potential location would be through the boat ramp, because that would be an opening. We could put another opening in the wall to get through it, or opening, or you could get around the wall where it meets the land at the. I want to say that's the east side, if I'm correct.
Just that the more openings there are, that's more locations for Public Works to visit during an event that they need to install the temporary measures.
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Pete. I hope you can hear me. My camera's not working, so I just wanted to echo that. I think this is of course up to the committee to decide, but I would be a proponent, or at least voice a proponent, for having the park on the seaward side of the wall, because of the fact that, number one, it's a lot easier to green on that side. It creates additional buffering capacity for storm events. So literally you don't have water going straight to wall. You have water going over some kind of vegetation that is maintained and some other features before it gets to the wall. And then I think access to that park could be done relatively easily, as Jan described, from access on the eastern end, going maybe stairs down to it, and then connecting to the other side to where the boat ramp is where you'd have the removable portion of the wall. So I personally like the idea of having a park on the seaward side because of that buffering capacity. And then it could also be beautified to, you know, really kind of be tying into the natural coastal features you have there, as opposed to having a wall just dropping off into the water.
I don't want to throw nails under the tires here, but I happen to be a handicapped person these days. I've got very limited function of my left side, and having to go to the far ends of this wall to get to a central table, I've got to say would be a little discouraging to me these days. And I just thought I'd throw that out there. I mean,
If we're having a pedestrian walkway down Taco Alley that'll lead right to a blank wall, it's almost a useless walkway. We should have an opening there.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah.
And maybe a couple of other ones, small ones that you could go through that don't have to be much be boarded up.
You could do a style, steps up and steps down.
well, maybe not steps, maybe ramped up and ramped down.
I don't think you even need that. All you need is a swing gate, you know, a heavy swing gate. I see these things all over the place in Florida, and they're very subtle, and you don't even think of them that much as a floodgate, but they're strong enough resilience that you just swing it, close it, lock it, and it's a floodgate.
Matt, could you share your screen with me? I have a visual of this 4-foot wall. So that's where, if you can see that, that's a 4-foot wall.
Can't see it.
Can't see it yet.
Whoops.
And we all see it.
No, nothing up.
You sharing that with me, Matt?
Nope, nothing.
No, I don't see it.
Is Matt there?
I was gonna say.
Yeah, Matt's there.
Matt's there. I've got it set for multiple sharing, Bob. I don't know what.
You have a thing, Bob, on share screen option below?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
what happens when you click that? There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So that's
4
foot.
Hmm.
And this would be
Worse.
an opaque wall, 4 feet at that. It's a central part of the parking lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
You can still see water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to wind up the subject of another political cartoon when I say this, but I need to say it. I'm not involved with this to save the view. I'm involved with this to save the town. And while I value the view, to weaken our defenses solely to enhance the view is a problem for me.
We need access to the view.
I
That's all.
concur with that.
And I agree with Pete with the vegetation being on the outside follows through what so many places around the world are trying to find ways to do. And that is to use vegetation to somewhat mitigate the problem.
So Pete and David, over the years, when you do have the vegetation on the seaward side and you do have a flooding event, what sort of damage to green spaces at parks have you seen, or are things pretty well built that they would withstand the forces that a flood would bring?
Having to deal with that is not new to us already in
True,
terms of
yeah.
that strip, that park strip and salt water and various assaults on it all the way up to dogs. And there is some maintenance involved with it, and that would continue no matter what side of the wall it's on.
Yeah, you're right, Dick. I'm getting trees to grow there. We've tried over the years. Oaks are about the only thing that survive at all, and even then, most of them eventually die. The grass, I think we have to replant.
Yeah.
every other year or so, but, so it's a struggle when you got salt environment, no question.
But they're they're
Yeah,
gonna
I
build it-
think there would
they're
need to
gonna build
be,
it with friendly plants, right?
What's that?
yeah, that's a good point, Haas. I think that's the rethinking that you have to go into this, thinking it's not going to necessarily be a green strip of grass with
Right.
20-inch oak trees growing there. That's just not viable for a saltwater oceanfront park or waterfront park. It's going to have to be salt dependent species. You know, maybe you could get a couple species that can survive some salt growing closer to the wall, but you know, this is going to probably have to be a little change in terms of most salt dependent vegetation down closer to the water, and then less salt dependent as you get away from it. But one of the key things I think is, you know, maintaining that continuity, allowing for it's going to get flooded. We know that area, but allowing public access, keeping it relatively pretty along there, but not planting stuff that you're going to have to, that's going to die and then have to get replanted in a couple of years. But kind of changing the thought of the species that go in there. And a landscape architect can tackle that relatively well and come up with something really beautiful that, you know, when you're walking there, you probably wouldn't even know there's a wall to your right if you're walking to the, you know, from east to west.
Well, that was in the proposal that we approved you guys made, wasn't it? David Chick
Yes.
said yes.
Yes.
There's already been the placement of an increasing number of paving stones there to deal with mud and tripping hazards and so on. So again, that's not a new problem for us either.
I have a question. Is there
Can
such,
anyone hear me?
is there such a thing as a hybrid combination dike wall, or I mean, seawall combined with a berm or a dike on the seaward side? So you'd have this vegetated slope sloping up to nearly the top of the wall, but on the parking lot side, the wall would drop right down to grade level. Has something like that ever done? I mean,
I think it's been done. I don't know that you'd want to lose the space on the seaward side, but I think it's feasible to design it. And I think I've seen things like that.
Getting back into handicap issues again, the slope becomes treacherous.
well, I'm not that handicapped. I can mow my lawn, climb on my tractor and work in the woods, but
Yes, Barnaby.
I just thought I would throw that out
You're
there.
not the only one we're considering.
I know. Anyhow, I thought since we were talking about options, I'd throw that hybrid in there.
What about the type of wall, whether it be sheet piles versus a concrete substrate? I mean, has that decision been discussed in detail? We discussed it before the contract was signed, but I haven't heard too much about. You mentioned the two different types, but not the next steps about the pros and cons, other than the fact that you can't put anything on top of the sheet pile one.
Yeah, I think we'd be looking at some sort of concrete combined with sheet pile. The geotech analysis will help us a little bit in this decision. What you won't have is only sheet pile. So it wouldn't be just you wouldn't just see steel from both sides. There'd be some sort of concrete facing or combination with concrete, I believe. That's my sense.
What I had talked about with Jan at some point was if we had to put a concrete face on it, maybe have some engravings that show the history or some other type of artwork facing the parking lot. Another option would be to make it a red brick, similar in color to the historic buildings.
Well, some of the examples you showed earlier encouraged me to think about how we tell the history of the place, or do we? On the other hand, if we have a walk on the outside, it's nice having just plain concrete to not distract from what you have in terms of natural growth and the beauty of them. So how do we balance those two?
And then there's the ultimate challenge of keeping graffiti off anything you do, and that's an issue in and of itself.
Knock
we
on
wouldn't
wood,
let our lens. Go ahead.
it's not been it's not been an issue in Damascotta as it has elsewhere I've lived. So hopefully that continues.
Well, I think that, you know, we can have a lot of discussion around that as the plans kind of develop. And once we decide on a direction, it's really a blank canvas, so to speak, in terms of what we might do there or what the options are. So you know, to the extent that we're thinking about it now, I think it's great. We can just add to it as the design comes together.
Regarding the materials and so on of the construction of a wall, I'm going to be especially sensitive to the issues of resilience of that wall to the various hydraulic pressures from waves in high water beating against them and so on. If any of you have seen in Japan, the Kamaishi seawall that they spent over $1 billion to build, and the first storm just totally took it right out. And I don't want to be there.
I wouldn't want to be the engineer that was in charge of that project either.
They completely miscalculated what pressures were being put on the wall.
That's actually a good segue to a point that we haven't made yet, which is that we have a team back at the office who's starting to look at the how to kind of update the FEMA mapping. The existing mapping is sort of rudimentary in how it was done. It's relatively aged, and so we'll have to come to FEMA with an update to the modeling and the mapping, and the wave run-up will be part of that. And so the point being is that we're looking at that right now. I don't have any answers yet.
Do you think they'll accept your modeling as an administrative issue with the government? They just have their own rules.
Yeah, so any modeling that we do that FEMA is going to review would be done according to their playbook. We wouldn't do something that's different, so.
Yeah, I think to add to that, Dave, Roy, one of our team members is checking with FEMA to make sure the modeling concepts, that we need to meet basically for that. And certainly, it'll be in conjunction with them and in talks with them as to what the modeling consists of and how, what all the pressures, wave run-up heights, base flood elevations, all those aspects will be, with their knowledge and approval. And I would also say in terms of the structural capacity of the wall, Dave mentioned the rest of our team we have a structural team, geotech team that are working on those issues, and all of those will be addressed in the final design concepts once we get to that stage.
We seem to have decided what type of wall we want, but have we considered the cost of these? Do we have any cost projections?
That's a really good point, Lou. I think what our plan is we needed to have some sense as to what may or may not be a good fit for this location. And what we need to do at this point is develop some of the underlying studies, see, these are next steps. So, and they've been started, like the coastal hydraulics, as was mentioned earlier, as well as the hydrology internal to the site and living shoreline and that sort of stuff. And then we'll start to put together a feasibility assessment and some cost, assigned costs to these things. And At that point, once we start getting our initial cost estimates together, then then we'll have to hone what direction we go in. Because it may be informative as to whether or not we do have a sheet pile wall, or if, with concrete facing, or if it's an all concrete wall, or there's a lot of decisions that haven't been made yet beyond just having a wall there, that will play into costs. So we do have room yet to move and to make sure that we fall within the cost budget that the town has for this.
Yeah, I'd like to add too, Jan, that in dealing with the EDA and so forth, I think it was maybe before we went to them, had done a cost estimate for the wall. I don't know how in detail it was, but it did assign cost to the wall and so forth. And what it came up to was 3 million something. Obviously, the closer we can get to what we want here, the record that's going to be.
Okay, one last question if I can. Is all this preferenced on the fact that the parking lot will stay this height it is and that flood prevention will just be duckbill exit ports and things to that extent? Or are we still having active pumping requirements?
We haven't gotten that answer yet. So what we're looking at is different storm events. And if we use a 100-year design storm event, that answer is going to be different than if we use a 25-year storm event to see what the volume of water is that we have to deal with in the parking lot during those flooding events. And those flooding events, obviously, it's not prolonged necessarily. They'll be somewhat related to the tide cycle. So we haven't made that determination yet. And in terms of adding additional soil to the parking lot, I mean, we can certainly. We haven't yet ruled out that, but my sense is that a 4-foot wall, if we were to put 2 feet of soil up against it and taper it back, for instance, to try and mitigate the appearance of the wall, my sense is that would result in potentially, we don't know it yet. We'll know more when I finish our geotech, but it'll result in some settlements occurring in an area where we have a couple of sewer lines. And whether or not that's tolerable or not, I don't know yet.
I know, Jan, a couple of weeks ago when we were talking at the town office, you had mentioned the possibility of underground storage along the outside there.
Yes, that is another possibility. We could store, if we needed to store, rather than pumping the storm water that might be in excess of what could drain out, we could potentially raise the grade of the parking lot by putting underground storage. But again, it would be a very temporary situation in terms of additional loading, but that's certainly something that we could look at.
I've long been somewhat perplexed of the concept of pumping water out so that it can come right back in again. It's not like we're pumping it over to Newcastle or something. But
no, it wouldn't be flowing back in if the water outside was low enough. It would flow out, obviously, but and it wouldn't flow in when the water elevation was high. It would be flowing in from other surface sources. Like if it was raining, it would have to be a coincidence of rain as well as a flooding event.
Yeah, we have a strong upriver influence that we don't want to take one eye off of.
Right.
So
all that water coming down from
some of the storm water comes down from up above, from down Main Street. How much of the stormwater is right there in the parking lot, and is part of this redesigning the stormwater system for that whole area, as it were, so that the stormwater goes off to the sides rather than comes into the parking lot?
We haven't gotten that far yet. We've walk the perimeter and walk the watershed that drains to the
Yep.
parking lot. And now we're just doing our hydraulic modeling to figure out how much water are we dealing with, and you know, trying to model what would happen if we had to shut the pipe off, the outlet pipe, and how far up would that water come.
But we are looking at changing the flow from the surrounding higher land if we need to, correct?
That's correct. That is a possibility. That's
Thing that hasn't been mentioned is snow removal. And before we've got this picture of a 4-foot wall in our heads, I mean, it seemed doable in my mind to drive up to this ramped up surface in the parking lot and bucket loaders at certain key spots, snow could be dumped overboard. But if we've got a real wall there, I think it'd be problematic to think all of that snow could just go down the launch ramp. There might be some situations where at times it would work, but in general, it seems like not very well thought out plan.
Matt, what's the current and future status of our waivers there?
The current waiver only allows us to dump snow at the ramp. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I've heard that sometimes it goes over the park, but it's not supposed to. It's supposed to go at the ramp because that's where the current is to whisk the snow away. So,
But Matt, you do,
that should, yeah.
you do dump it over by the bridge there by Clayton Howard's property.
Yeah, the parking lot snow goes in at the boat ramp, and then we have a second location that doesn't involve the parking lot. It's right at the river at the attorney's office location. We pay them $2,500 a year to allow us to dump snow there. So yeah, to answer Barnaby's question, the snow is not supposed to be dumped over the park. It's supposed to go down through the launch area. So Jan, do you want to just, or Dave, just briefly go through the next steps? I think we'll be looking to meet again at the end of next month to look at the feasibility study, or review the feasibility study with you, but do you want to go into a little more detail there?
Yeah, Jan, do you want to start, and I'll add whatever I need to on the modeling? There's a lot going on.
sorry, I got my phone on. There we go. Yeah, again, what we started and what we're looking at is we're looking at the coastal hydraulics, drainage hydrology, some of the sea level rise analysis, living shoreline. We're looking at developing those studies and bringing those along so that we can then feed that into our feasibility analysis. Our feasibility analysis is going to bring together the outcome of those studies to have a more definitive idea as to what the elevation is that we're going to be designing this wall to. We'll have our geotechnical report hopefully wrapped up by then. So that'll start to inform what some of the options might be for the foundation support of a wall, or what types of wall systems we might be looking at, so we can put some numbers to those. And we'll look at, also have an idea as to what the role of permitting and will play in this, and any kind of mitigation we might need for environmental impacts that we have. So those are the types of information that we hope to have together for our study in January, the end of January. David, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
No, I think just to elaborate on the coastal modeling part of it, that's what Noah and I need to work with Roy Schiff on closely right now, and make sure that we keep that moving, and that we coordinate with FEMA. Sometimes working with FEMA can gonna add some time, so we want to make sure we get feedback quickly from them, and we'll report back on that soon.
Okay, I think that's about it, unless anyone has any further comments or questions. We'll be in touch and we'll set up another.
I'd like to say that notion that I brought up about this hybrid wall, what I'm sort of picturing in my head, in fact, it's evolved a little since I first brought it up, is that on the seaward side, this slope vegetated surface could actually flatten out near the top of the wall, maybe be 10 feet wide or something like that, would be a surface that could be utilized as park space. So you would need a ramp or something to get up to that level, but it would be wide enough, maybe with low railings or something, for people to climb up and sit on, perched on this wall. That's what I'm thinking. I'm just throwing these ideas out. I don't know what's possible, doable, acceptable. Just trying to solve this in my head.
Yeah, and thanks, Barnaby. I appreciate that. There may also be additional environmental impacts as a result of that, because we'll be pushing the toe of the slope out further into the river. And so that's something we need to consider with that particular, it's all a balancing act with that particular option.
The toe of that has long and often been a problem for us, a constriction on various things that we've thought about doing. The agencies are very, very protective of just exactly how far out we go there.
Mhm.
And my understanding, we can't go any farther out than we are currently.
Yeah, that could be correct. The only thing is, if we are able to do some sort of environmental living shoreline there, that might be more acceptable to the Army Corps and DEP, EPA.
Well, isn't this why we're paying these expensive consultants and engineers, is to build a living shoreline
Right.
out there without us having to lose any
That's right.
parking? I thought that was
And
what
then-
it was all about.
And then, we're not delving.
That's good.
We're not delving too much into the landscaping part of it, but Malone and McBroom and Wright Pierce have tremendous expertise when it comes to the landscape work. We heard from Jason during the interview, and it sounded like he had some great ideas that we'll hear about in the coming month or so.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time today and your input and your feedback.
Good.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll be in
Good
touch.
to see everybody. Yeah.
See you later.
Okay, bye all.
Thanks.
Thanks,
everyone. Appreciate your time and comments.
Okay.
Play safe.